as I recall, there was a self-conscious development of a concept called the quadrant. Was that at the time of Milliken's?
That's when it started with Milliken.
Where it would be a meeting of the governor, a representative of each caucus, both caucuses in both houses.
Right. You'd usually have the speaker and the minority leader there and the leader in the Senate. And at times they would bring in, like if they were dealing with a budget, people from appropriations or people from taxation, depending on the issues they were dealing with.
And that was an effort to try to reach a kind of understanding of what the problem is and what options we've got.
There was a lot of complaining about it because a lot of people felt left out of the process, that the quadrant and the governor would reach an agreement and they would implement it. And that's basically the way it worked. But in doing that, I mean, I remember one instance where Bill Bryant couldn't deliver his caucus.
Bill Bryant was then the
minority leader in the
House.
And it was kind of an embarrassing situation for him and the governor. I won't get into those details, but it wasn't always automatic when we reached agreement, but generally it was.
You served then during the time you were Speaker. Mike Bush and Bill Bryant at different times were minority leader?
I think Bryant was the minority leader the first 2 years, and then I think Bush the last 4 I was there.
Okay. And and then Engler became the majority leader in the Senate. You started out working budget stuff together. What was your understanding of the relationship you had with John Engler? Was it, did you face conflicts over your philosophy?
Oh yeah, John is totally different philosophically, and his caucus was different philosophically from where I was coming from. You know, I think it reflects back on your background. I come from a public housing project, you know. And government subsidized housing. My dad was in prison, and I went through, I was in the Army, I went to college on the GI Bill. And although I worked all those times, I recognized and appreciated the support that I had gotten from government my entire life. And I still feel that way. I'm fortunate enough to know and see how government can be an important factor in a person's life and keeping a safety net. And so that's the reason I was a Democrat. That's the reason I'm a Democrat today. Society can't operate without an effective government. We've seen that for the last 8 years. When the least effective the government, the more problems you're going to have. And we saw that under Bush. It's been a total disaster.
So you had basic philosophical disagreement.
Yeah, I never bought the limited government argument. I never bought the less government, the better off everyone is. I felt that when you went to DNR and you wanted a permit, there should be adequate staff people there to give you a permit within a reasonable period of time. I felt that the people in our public schools and even private schools deserved the type of support that government could provide for them, so they could be competitive in society and in the world. That was a philosophy I had, and the Republicans, and I believe that it should be as accessible as possible. Of course, they went from that. You know, they wanted you to pay higher fees, and pay higher tuition, and less government support. That's where the state's at now. It started a trend under Engler. Was really, after Blanchard left, it was really exaggerated in the sense that they were cutting taxes and increasing spending in some areas, but in many instances putting the burden onto the individual in the sense of fees and tuition and things of that nature. And even property taxes in some ways, although they did, I think, come up with a better property tax situation than what we had before. Not a perfect one, but a better situation.
Under proposal, you mean proposal A and
yeah, the property tax had gotten to the point in our state where it was so contentious that it was really almost self-destructing. You know, we had to have some form of relief, and moving to the sales tax was probably the only solution that we could get done. So I thought that was the right thing to do.
Now, were you still in the House when Engler became governor?
No.
So you had already left.
Yeah, Dodat was Speaker when Engler became governor.
You left appropriations, became Speaker. So you were saying earlier, this kind of took you away from some of your engagement in issues into more of an administrative role. Is that a difficult transition?
It was a very difficult. I didn't particularly care for the administrative part of my job, but I got great advice from Bobby Crown when he left, and he took me out to lunch one day, and he said, the thing you're going to distaste the most about this job is something you have to pay the most attention to, and that's the personnel and the behavior of the legislators. You got to protect them, you got to take care of them, you got to watch out for them. At the same time, you got to be strong, you got to turn them down, you got to learn when to say no, and you got to know what's going on with your budget, your house budget, because if anything goes wrong, it's you. And that's the thing that can bring you down, is that house budget and the way it's handled and house options. And you have to be particularly attentive to it. He recommended Nell Kumanich, who I hired and was very, very good at that. So, yeah, that
you hired her as your
administrative chief of staff, and she did a great job. But it was a very time-consuming, and as you know, when guys are in for trips and eliminate out-of-state travel, that certainly wasn't very popular, and during the budget crisis, and we just did a lot of things. I can remember when the fiscal agency guys we found out they were going out lunch and staying to 2, 3 o'clock drinking every day, and I said, you can't drink on house time if you're a house staffer. You know, you're just not allowed to drink. Well, that was very unpopular, and the unions started complaining. But it was just, it was a part of the job that I never really enjoyed. Mm-hmm. Now, the legislator was on the floor interacting with legislators, interacting on legislation, getting things done. I really enjoyed that. That was a fun thing to do.
Were there issues, particular legislative battles, other than the budget and tax stuff that you know were especially fun?
Well, yeah, they were all. It's hard to remember the little battles that you have every day, but you know there were always ongoing battles that you had to work. In the budget, I always, still, even when I was Speaker, I had a great deal of input into the budget process because of my experience in that area. And in many instances, like one time Morris Hood wouldn't come
Morris
to me.
Hood, a rep from Detroit.
Yeah, and I had to take over higher ed and pass it again, you know, as a Speaker and go to the negotiations. And yeah, you ran into instances like that, and then settling conflicts among the legislators, which occurred often. That it was many times they'd end up in the Speaker's office where something happened in a committee or something happened on the floor that these people didn't get along, or just different conflicts that you had to resolve.
What was the biggest majority you had, number?
I think 64. I believe, I may be wrong on that number, but I know we got back all the ones we lost in the tax thing. We went down to 57, I believe, and then we went back to 64 when I left there.
So you got 64 people, and they're pretty diverse in almost any way you describe diverse. Philosophically, ideologically, kind of communities they represent. How do you keep them talking to each other and working together? What are the mechanics of that?
Well, I think it's first of all, you have to realize, I think 90% of them, I say even higher, probably 95% of them were there to do a job, you know, and so they would recognize themselves that you had to eventually get along. You had to eventually do something. You had to pass something. You had to deal with the issues. So it isn't like you're the only person there that has the common good in mind. That would be wrong to think that or even imply it. It was someone says like herding chickens, and there is a lot to that. But when it got right down to it, it's even today in Washington and Lansing, wherever it is, when the pressure's on, when it got right down to it, people generally do what's the right thing to do. And I've always, with the right kind of leadership. I do think, though, that the people in leadership positions have to demonstrate leadership ability in order to accomplish hard things and tough things. It just is not going to happen automatically. And I felt when I was Speaker that I did an adequate job. I always, I wasn't one that was visited a whole lot by self-doubt. You know, I made a decision, that was it, and I moved on. I didn't sit around and worry about it or whether it was the right thing or wrong thing.
Had you pictured yourself that way? I mean, did you know yourself as a leader in that way?
No, I think, Lynn, is more the way I was raised. I didn't have an option. You know, when you come up and you're raised on the streets like we were, mother worked 9 to 9. That's 6 days a week. That's 12 hours a day. And we were on our own. I mean, it was a little family, little kids running around. We raised ourselves. We're in boys' club and on the streets. And so when you come up, and even though it was in Montgomery, Alabama, it's still a public housing project, and the drug abuse, alcoholism, although drugs in the sense that we have today were not a problem in the 50s and when I was there, but alcohol, basically people in public housing projects are there for one reason or another. A large part of that was